Hello Rammers and welcome back to some more of yesterday's RAM. One of my lovely viewers requested we look at the AMD Radeon R5 340X graphics card. It uses the Oland GCN1 core with 384 shaders running at 900 MHz and has 2GB of DDR3 memory on a narrow 64-bit bus running at 1000 MHz. It's a Dell OEM card and comes in a low-profile format. The specs are on screen now. I purchased this card on eBay for just 17.5 Great British pounds, including postage and packaging, which is around $22 US, and I've been informed it retails on AliExpress for around $30 US, if you like really long waits. I actually had a hard time finding an R5 340X with a full height bracket, so I thought, why not stick it into an old small form factor office machine? So I purchased a Fujitsu, or Fujitsu as my mate calls them, Esprimo D556/E85 Plus on eBay for just 41 Great British pounds, around $50 US. The specifications for the system are on screen. The system came without any storage, so I had to add the solid state drive and hard disk. For around the same price I could have purchased a Haswell i5 system with a disk, which may have performed better in games due to having 4 physical cores, but as I already have a Haswell system to test, I went with the newer Skylake i3 6100 system. This system should support up to the i7 6700, so stay tuned for further upgrades to this system. Apart from adding storage, I also swapped out the RAM. It came with a single 8GB stick of DDR4. From experience, I know that single channel memory can have a detrimental effect on gaming performance. Since I already had an 8GB DDR4 kit, I removed the single module and installed the two 4GB modules for dual channel memory. So let's break down the total system cost. The Fujitsu was 41 Great British pounds, the AMD R5 340X was 17.5 Great British pounds, the 8GB DDR4 memory kit was 30 Great British pounds, the 120GB solid state drive was 20 Great British pounds, and the 1TB Seagate Constellation hard disk was 15 Great British pounds. This gives us a total system cost of $123.5 Great British pounds, or around $151.47. As we have a new CPU, let's run Cinebench on it. The i3 6100 scores 909 points for single core performance. For multi-core performance, it scores 2,283 points. The i3 6100 was released in 2015 and is a 2-core CPU with hyperthreading for a total of 4 threads. It has nearly double the single-core performance of the Xeon or the Phenom. And despite only having 2 physical cores, it does manage to best the 4-core Phenom 2 X4 980 in multi-core performance. Running the Heaven benchmark at 720p low settings, the R5 340X gives us a 30 frames per second average and scores 755 points. Now, we can't compare this benchmark result to the previous Heaven benchmarks we've run, as we've used different settings, but as we test more low-profile cards, we will add to this graph. Let's start off with a much older title to give the little R5 340X a chance. I picked Assassin's Creed 2, and all games have been benchmarked at 720p low presets. We're off to a good start with an average FPS of just under 60. 1% and 0.1% lows indicate gameplay should be relatively smooth. We'd need to test a few more titles, but it looks like the R5 340X is fine for PS3 and Xbox 360 era games. The original Skyrim from 2011 seems to be running just fine on the R5 340X at 720p low presets. Let's take a look at the benchmark for the figures. In Skyrim at 720p low settings, the R5 340X produces an average frame rate of 50.4, with a 1% low of 29.8 and a 0.1% low of 26.3. This should indicate that the R5 340X will give us a nice playable experience in Skyrim. All the cool kids play Counter-Strike Go at 720p low settings, and now you can too on the R5 340X. As the MSI Afterburner overlay doesn't work in Counter-Strike, I've got the frame rate counter up in the top left-hand corner. Bioshock Infinite ran well enough on the R5 340X that you might want to consider turning up the graphical detail. The R5 340X delivers an average frame rate of 56.9, with a solid 1% low of 42.2 and a solid 0.1% low of 39.9. These results indicate that you could increase the graphical detail to aim for a 30 frames per second experience. Batman Arkham Origins looks like it should be playable on the R5 340X, and reinforces the idea that this card is suitable for PS3 and Xbox 360 era titles. The benchmark results for Batman Arkham Origins show that the R5 340X can deliver us a smooth playable experience at 720p low settings. Grand Theft Auto 5 looks like it would be playable on the R5 340X, and the performance figures we're seeing are in line with the previous titles tested. The R5 340X delivers an average frame rate of 46 frames per second, with a 1% low of 31.6 and a 0.1% low of 29.4. This indicates we should have a smooth and very playable experience, at least in the single player campaign. Now for some Rocket League. And if you were hoping to play Rocket League on the R5 340X, you're going to be disappointed. According to the MSI Afterburner overlay, we're only getting around 17 frames per second. Let's check the benchmark results. Rocket League didn't like the R5 340X at all. We get an average frame rate of 17.4, with a 1% low of 6.6 and a 0.1% low of 6.4. Now I am surprised by this because I actually found my online game to be very playable, but these are the figures we've got from our benchmark run. With 2015's Rise of the Tomb Raider, we are seeing the R5 340X struggle. It seems to be producing a frame rate in the region of 20 to 25 frames per second. Let's check the benchmark for the actual figures. In my opinion, you're not going to have a good experience playing Rise of the Tomb Raider on the R5 340X. We have a cinematic average frame rate of 24.1, but the 1% low drops to 19.9 frames per second and the 0.1% low drops to 14.9. You're going to experience some stuttering if you play Rise of the Tomb Raider on the R5 340X. The Witcher 3 is just too much for the little R5 340X. We can see that it's delivering an average frame rate of around 15 frames per second, far below a playable level. The R5 340X can only deliver an average frame rate of 13.4 frames per second, and the 1% low drops to 0.6 frames per second, as does the 0.1% low. It's not playable on an R5 340X. It's time for some Battlefield 1. This video was recorded in the single player campaign, but the benchmark was taken from an online multiplayer game. The R5 340X delivered a very nice average frame rate of 32.2 and a 1% low of 23.9 frames per second, but unfortunately our 0.1% low has dropped to 1.4, and I can report that during my online game I did experience multiple instances of stutter and pause. Now this may be down to the CPU or the GPU. It's something we'll have to look at in future videos. I think this is the first time we've benchmarked Fortnite on the channel. Now, just a moment while I take out this rebel scum. Die, you rebel scum. Now, let's cut there before we see me walking off a cliff. In Fortnite at 720p low settings, the R5 340X delivered an average frame rate of 29.8 frames per second, but the 1% low of 12.6 frames per second and the 0.1% low of 4.6 frames per second show that the frame rate is not consistent. I did experience stuttering while playing online, and if it happens just at the wrong moment, you'll get fragged by someone with a better GPU. While it wasn't a terrible experience, it's hard to recommend this card for running Fortnite. We are playing Valorant on the R5 340X at 720p low settings. Released in 2020, it's the newest title in our benchmark lineup. It runs on almost anything, and the R5 340X is no different. We're seeing well over 100 frames per second. You know, I heard a rumour that it runs rather well on a NES. Let's see how well it did in the benchmark run. The R5 340X delivered an average frame rate of 120 frames per second, with a 1% low of 78 frames per second and a 0.1% low of 47.7 frames per second. With these results, we could even consider increasing graphical detail or resolution. If you're looking for a very cheap, low-profile GPU to play Valorant on, then the R5 340X could be a possible option for you. It's conclusion time. What do I think of the R5 340X? Well, it's a very cheap GPU, and if you want to play Valorant and some older titles like GTA 5 at 720p, it's fine. But I have to say, I was looking for just a little bit more power. I think the R5 340X is held back by the narrow 64-bit memory bus and slow DDR3 memory. But there are other options at this price point, at least in the UK. On eBay, I've seen the R5 340X priced at around 20 to 25 Great British pounds, around $30 US. For this price, you can also pick up the R5 430, which uses the same Oland XT GPU and 64-bit memory bus, but is fitted with faster GDDR5 memory. Or there's the R7 250 OEM, which also uses the Oland XT GPU and DDR3 memory, but has a wider 128-bit memory bus. Which of these cards is best? We'll be finding out. But the Fujitsu I purchased already came with a GPU, the Intel HD Graphics 530, the Integrated Graphics Processor, or IGP, in the i3 6100 CPU. How does this compare to the R5 340X? Stay subscribed for all this and more. Catch you later, Rammers. Computer Bob, out.